This series is presented by the National Dropout Prevention Center, a division of SPN, the Successful Practices Network. The pandemic's impact on at-risk students, schools, and learning was presented live to the South Carolina Department of Education by Dr. Sandy Addis, the chairman of the National Dropout Prevention Center, on his recent publication co-authored by Ray McNulty with an introduction from Dr. Bill Daggett.
Another thing we've got to pay attention to as we come back to school, attendance patterns and norms were totally disrupted. Most schools have worked for years to build a culture of school attendance. We attend here, we all come to school, we try to keep our absences to a minimum, those kind of things. And school attendance is important. And we've preached the importance of school attendance for years to kids and parents in the community. Well, now all of a sudden, some students were unable to fully participate in virtual instruction. And you guys alluded to this when you reported out from your groups a few minutes ago. You know, there was virtual instruction and there was virtual instruction. Some districts in South Carolina were very well prepared to do virtual instruction. They had e-learning systems. There were several districts that had already piloted e-learning systems where they replaced snow days, for example, and bad weather days with virtual instruction. The teachers were trained, the kids had laptops, they knew how to sign on, they had practiced, they had done it. So they were able to kick that system in gear, just ramp it up, expand it, and use it for virtual instruction. There were also districts in South Carolina that when the shutdown occurred, were scrambling to make copies of worksheets and staple them together and hand them out to parents as they drove by the front door of the school on a designated day of the week for their kids. And that was the beginning of virtual instruction for them. They didn't have computers, they didn't have take-home equipment, they didn't have connectivity. And there were places in South Carolina where connectivity was poor or unavailable, either because of the situation, the setup, the technology, or the child's situation. And then we had situations where districts would ship a laptop and some passwords to a kid and say, sign on and let's go. And that maybe didn't work too well in some cases. Maybe it didn't happen. And so students there was virtual instruction that was excellent. There was virtual instruction that was minimal, to say the least. Attendance monitoring and truancy enforcement mechanisms have been totally disrupted. How do you take attendance for a virtual class? Well, what most teachers tried to do was to go online and see who signed on and how long they signed on and try to treat it somewhat as if it were kids in seats in a classroom and I'm taking the roll. But that didn't fit. It just did not fit the model. Kids had different ability to sign on. They had different ability to do it at different times. Some of them were supervised, some of them weren't. And so attendance right now, if you ask many districts around the country, we'd like to see your attendance data for last year. They're going to say, we can't figure that out. We don't know what the attendance data was because it was so confusing. How do you count it and how do you do it? And we, in many places, we had a real pattern of attendance enforcement where, you go miss a certain number of days, you get a letter, you miss a certain number of other days, you get turned into the family court or whatever. And all those things have just been blown out of the water. And then another situation that we've got to acknowledge is that students, parents, and community assumptions about attendance have changed. We had preached for years that school attendance was holy. It was important. It was critical. It had to happen. You have to be in the building. You got to have an excuse. You have to come. You must be here. And then all of a sudden we said, no, you can't be here. We don't want you here. We're not going to allow you here. And we're going to send you some things to help you sort of be here virtually. And so now a lot of that mindset that attendance is holy that existed among parents and community, a lot of them are saying, maybe not. I mean, you can watch television in South Carolina around the 6 o'clock news in most parts of the state, and you can see ads from vendors who are attempting here at school opening to lure students into virtual instruction that's a commercial endeavor. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, not passing judgment, except to say that now when parents see that, they say, wow, that virtual thing, maybe we should buy it. Maybe we should sign on for that. Maybe we should go K-12 or South Carolina virtual or something. And so people's assumptions that we worked hard to create have sort of gone by the wayside. And we have to remember that. Also, academic supports were curtailed during the pandemic. We know that, for example, tutoring and extended learning time was unavailable. Now, we may have tried to offer it virtually, but a lot of schools had after-school programs, had credit recovery programs, had extended day time where we would, the 21st century community learning centers that we've had so often around the state in many districts, where students would stay after school, they would have refreshments, they would do something sort of fun and engaging, and then they would learn and be tutored and have extended learning and hopefully master the content. There again, that disappeared. We may have attempted it virtually, but it didn't work very well. Makeup opportunities were curtailed. Many districts had credit recovery opportunities where they said, well, you can go over to the alternative program in the evening and recover this high school credit. You can go in the intercession and have credit recovery. Many of those were curtailed, and course failure rates increased. We know that around the state, and we don't have data on it yet, but we know anecdotally from districts reporting this and what people have said, is that course failures increased during virtual instruction and during the pandemic shutdown. Now, we know that course failures produce grade retention. And I refer to grade retention as the kiss of death for graduation. Retained students can and sometimes do graduate, but it's not the norm. Retained students have a much greater risk of dropping out in later grades. And we know that grade retentions occurred all over the state, particularly in virtual instruction. Some districts in South Carolina, the one where I'm on the school board here in Anderson 5, we did this. We started back last August, a year ago. But what we did was we offered face-to-face instruction with all the distancing and the precautions. And we also offered virtual instruction on a semester by semester option. And what we found was that the virtual instruction students had much higher failure rates than the face-to-face instruction students. Now, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I know we've got some participants here from Greenville County, which is a wonderful school district that worked very hard during the pandemic. But here was a headline from the Greenville News back in November of 2020. And this was the actual headline. The number of Greenville students failing has tripled this year, report shows. Now, we saw that all over the state. And it wasn't just Greenville. It was in most places where there was particularly virtual instruction or blended instruction, the F rates went up. And so now we've got that situation. We've got those kids with those last year's Fs, and in some cases already been notified that they're going to be retained in grade coming back to us here with school opening. Now, here's another thing to consider. A lot of districts have lost students, particularly upper grade students. A lot of districts in high schools and middle schools will say, well, we've got 5 or 10 or 15% of the kids. We don't even know where they are. We can't find them. They've dropped off the rolls. They didn't sign on for virtual instruction. We don't know what happened. We can't get in touch with them. And so the first thought is, well, we've got to find them and get them back in school. True, very true. And you've got districts that are planning, door-to-door Saturday student recovery days and all sorts of things of that nature. And that's good. We've got to do that. We've got to find those students and get them back. A lot of students, when a student drops out of school, particularly a kid that hits 16 or 17, they've already decided they want to be out of school. They aren't old enough. They're waiting for the day that they are old enough when they get close to the magic age. And then they look for an excuse to drop out. They look for a trigger, if you will, something to say, that's why I dropped out, and something that seems logical to them and maybe their families and their peers. And so when we had the shutdown, for many kids, I hate to use the term, but that was a perfect opportunity for many of them to say, I'm out of here. This virtual thing doesn't work. I'm gone. And so we're out there trying to recover these kids. And many of you right now, I know in your districts, as you begin to get ready to open school, many of you actually have recovery days or recovery initiatives or a recovery team to call and get on social media and try to find these kids. But here's the thing to remember. If we get them back and get them in a seat and get them in a classroom and get them on the roll, that's just the beginning. because then we've got to get them back on track. They're probably, if they dropped off the roll during the pandemic shutdown, and we do get them back, by definition, they're probably behind. I mean, the virtual instruction didn't occur. And so they're going to be behind. They're going to be credit deficient. And now we've got them back. And now we've got to say, sort of like saying, hey, Johnny, welcome back. We love you. We're so glad you're back. By the way, you got to repeat 2 courses and you're in the 9th grade again. And that's not a very good message.